Welcome to AI for Growth, Lessons from Leaders. I'm your host, Megan Driscoll. AI for Growth is a podcast that demystifies AI for business owners. Each episode features conversations with leaders who share their experiences, covering the good, the bad, and the ugly of AI implementation. We aim to help businesses understand how and where AI can effectively scale your operations, focusing on practical insights rather than just hype. Welcome. Thanks for joining AI for Growth Lessons from Leaders. Today, I'm super excited. I have Jeff Sigel with me, and thanks for coming to the show. Thanks for speaking us today. I'd like to start off with, tell us a little bit about yourself. Tell us a little about your business as kind of an opener.
So first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show. My background actually is in food marketing, so literally nothing to do with AI. So, and I spent many years working at Nabisco, the Hershey company. I worked for the parent company of Stop and Shop, for those of you in the Northeast, and then I worked at Cracker Barrel. I now say not recently because there's been a little messiness at Cracker Barrel recently. But, and when
you leave that off your resume.
Yeah, I leave it. Well, you kind of have to explain it at some point. Whatever.
Actually, anyway, I like Cracker Barrel, to be honest with you. Growing up, in college, absolutely. It was big in the South, and I went there all the time.
Yeah, no, I mean, everybody loves it, but it's like, it's, how it goes.
I know how it goes.
So anyway, after I left there, I went off and started my own business. And so, actually the first thing I did was I wrote a book, which you can see over my head here, which is called The Middle Matters, a Toolkit for Middle Managers, and got really into sort of thinking about the leadership lessons that I had learned over the course of my career. And then at the same time, as I was kind of, starting to get into this sort of leadership stuff and writing a book, my twin brother and I started to sort of think about how you can use AI for marketing. And we were really fascinated by this idea of digital twins, and I guess being twins ourselves, and this idea that how can you create an AI sort of version of someone who, maybe it's the boss in a small company, and they're and so you need to have salespeople that don't understand how the business works or whatever it is, and you want them to understand it. So couldn't you create essentially a twin of the boss where they could ask them questions or whatever, and remove that bottleneck of the boss having to be in every conversation, every meeting? And so we started a company called Twinning Edge. Had to have a little dad pun in there. So
yeah, I love that.
So that's what I do these days. Along with I do, I'm also really fascinated in how AI is sort of playing into leadership. My focus in the leadership work that I do is all about how do you, again, same kind of idea of how do I expand the leadership capacity. And so some of that is just how do you help people understand how to lead in a way that allows the team to accomplish more. And some of it is actually around how you use AI to expand your leadership capabilities. And so I've actually been doing a lot of trainings recently, and I've got a bunch on the calendar for April around what I call Boss GPT, which I'm sure we'll get to at some point. There's a little story behind the idea of Boss GPT, but this idea of how you can use large language models to really expand your own capabilities as a leader.
Yeah. Well, and that's why, I was really intrigued about having you on, because the show is really about allowing people to see all the ways in which AI can help their businesses and help themselves, and not just beyond sort of ChatGPT and prompting for a specific thing that they need,
right.
But really embracing all the ways in which AI can support you. And I do think, I do think this concept of utilizing AI for support in professional and personal ways.
Yeah.
I think I've talked in the show before about how much I love Claude as a advisor, mentor,
absolutely,
psychologist. I've brought Claude with some problems with my kids and things going on with my family, and I'm amazed at the result. When I get back the feedback, I'm like, Yes, Claude, that sounds fantastic. I'm 100% going to do that. And I'm going to say it in exactly that way. And so I think it really is a very helpful tool to be able to understand that. So talk a little bit about that, like, because I do think that, I think people underestimate how important prompting is and like what exactly you're putting into it to get the right result. So talk to us a little bit about like what kind of prompting do you see as important for when you're, again, going at it from like a leadership standpoint, like, hey, this is the problem. Do you put in the actual email that you received and some context around it, or like how do you use it?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the answer is yes, but it just depends on what I'm trying to accomplish. But I think I was just putting together. I'm doing a course on running a course on prompting in April. I know some folks at Misericordia College, which is in northeastern Pennsylvania. So I'm going to be doing this course, and so I was putting it together. And one of the very first sort of slides is what I call the anatomy of a good prompt. Right. Mm-hmm. And the anatomy of a good prompt. And I'll go one step further after this, but just at the basic level is what's the role that you want AI to play. So if you want AI to be your executive coach, say, I want you to be an executive coach, right? And tell it what to do. And in that sort of, you know how these things work, that sort of pushes the probabilities of what it says next to that kind of realm. Then you obviously have to tell it the task you're asking it to do. So what is it I need you to do for me? It's helpful for you to tell it the audience, right? Like if you're writing an email, like I'm writing an email I actually use it a lot because I guess maybe the thing that I'm least comfortable with, in my business work is that I've sort of become de facto a salesperson, and I was never a salesperson. I was always a marketer, which, is different as
They're
you know.
different.
And so I'm always like trying to make, how do I need to write this email for the CEO, or I need to write this email for, a CMO or whatever, or I'm talking to somebody who might be interested in, individual coaching or whatever it is. So you have to tell it the audience, the context, what's going on. It's helpful to tell it the tone as well. Like what kind of, do you want to be serious? Do you want to be casual? Trying to be funny, whatever it is. And then of course the format of what you want, the output. And then there's the other piece, which is giving it some constraints, that other constraints, like I want it to be no more than 150 words or whatever. So if you get the more specific the context you give it, the better reaction you'll get. The more broad you ask it for something, the more you get just random stuff. I always say ChatGPT or whatever your favorite LLM is like the collective stupidity of the internet. Mm-hmm. If you start without any constraints, you're going to get just sort of this average response. And in fact, that's why, this is what hallucinations are basically like ChatGPT and Claude and whatever, all they're doing is saying, hey, what's the next most likely word to put in this sentence? And if the probabilities are like, well, this word's 10% and this word's 9%, it's going to pick the 10%, and that's how you get hallucinations, right? Because it's like it still picks something. I was saying to to my wife last night, it's like, ChatGPT left to its own devices is sort of like a toddler with like an overconfidence problem, right?
Yeah.
Like just,
Right.
like it thinks it knows everything because it's not designed to sort of be like, hey, I don't really know occasionally you'll get an I don't know the answer to that. But most of the time it's like, it'll just pick the next word and it'll tell you something and you have to go with it. The way to deal with that is to really constrain it, give it a clear body of information to work with.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I also think that, and people don't do this enough either, which is like, tell me all the reasons why this won't work.
Yes.
Give me all the negative. Where could this go wrong? And then there's more discernment there, right? Because I have found that it never tells me that my idea is bad.
Right.
My idea is always amazing and I should absolutely do it. And so what I've started to do is say, is there a downside to this? Are you aware of something that someone else has done where this has backfired? Or how could I be embarrassed by this? Or how could this turn out in a different outcome than the one I've said that I want? The desired outcome. And that has been really helpful to get like there's this situation where, and then you're like, oh, okay, all right, so I should consider that,
Yeah, I mean, you can also ask it, take the opposite perspective.
Yes.
Using,
Argue against me.
yeah, argue against me. Argue, or even to say, hey, ask it to first, say, write an email and then say, play the role of my boss, edit, as a, my tough, difficult, boss or whatever, and edit this and don't, be honest, don't hold back, tell me what the negatives are. I really want this to be I really want to make this email better, and actually have it critique its own work, is an interesting thing as well. You can absolutely get it to do that. Sometimes I'll take it. Sometimes I'll take its output from one conversation and just start a new chat to see if I can get sort of the history out of the context window, because it sometimes gets sort of stuck in this like, oh, I'm talking about the same thing.
Right.
I've been talking about all over and over again.
Do you think, I when we talk about AI replacing people, right? And because I do think that it is going to replace a certain level of person within an organization. And I've had a lot of conversations with people about the humanity of this. I personally don't think that it will ever be not necessary to constrain through human eyes. I always feel like there will be a necessity for someone to be there managing kind of the output, if you will, right? Like, and providing some human oversight. I just can't see us completely autonomous, like running and just being like, yeah, I mean, sure, we'll do whatever, like, and it's running off behind the scenes. But I do think that it can replace, and especially in this space of, I'm very interested to see what happens in the space of coaching. Okay, so it has blossomed, right? I mean, 15 years ago, a coach was like someone with a whistle on a field, right? And now we have coaches for everything. Where do you see this fitting into that industry and like the impact that it could have on the industry? And have you thought at all about like ways in which coaches can mitigate for that? Like how do you see that in that space? Because as a coach too, this is affecting you in real time. So I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Well, I'm going to shoehorn in here the Boss GPT story, if you don't mind, because I think it's sort of relevant to this point. Is I always tell people, first of all, prompting isn't new, right? And the idea of Boss GPT came about probably about a year and a half ago. I was talking to this woman that I know. She had set up lunch. She's actually from the advancement office of the university where I got my MBA or whatever. And she was going to be in Boston, and she's like, I'd love to have lunch with you. And I'm like, great, I'm going to ask for money, whatever. But she didn't ask me for money. She had read my book, and she said, I need some help. She said, my boss is a micromanager. It's kind of soul crushing. What do I do?
Which is a very common story, unfortunately. I hear that all the time. My boss is a micromanager. I'm like, yeah, well, welcome to corporate America.
Right. And so I was like, well, I told her what I always tell people. I'm like, well, listen, this is what you need to do. I mean, basically, the answer to a micromanager is, I call it feeding the beast. Give them all the details until they go back off or whatever. Yeah, I'm good.
Too much. Really, too much.
Too much. I'm good. You've got it covered. And so she goes off, and like a couple months later, she comes back to me. She was back in Boston, and she's talking to me, and it's now January, and she says, we're having coffee, and she says, Jeff, I was like, how's it going? And she's like, Jeff, it was going great. And I was like, what do you mean was going great? And she goes, well, everything got better when I did the things you said. And then I went on vacation for 2 weeks. And when I came back, my boss was like right back to the way she was. Like, she had completely changed, and now she's back to the way she was. And I go, I said, yeah, because she didn't change. I said, you can't change your boss. All you can do is change the way you prompt your boss. It's like Boss GPT. I said, and the way you know this is because when you stopped prompting her, she just went back to her default, right? And so I said to her, if you go back to prompting this person in a way that, whatever way you were doing before, they will change, right? And so the reason I sort of bring that story up is because what's fascinating is that AI, these LLMs, are not. We always say, oh, some people say to me, Jeff, that's such a great analogy, and I'll say, no, it's not an analogy. The analogy is the GPT, right? That generative pre-trained transformer, the LLM, right, is the analogy. It's literally built to behave, at some level the way we do, and it's pretty good, right? You can have a conversation. And so the fact that we now have a tool that functions in the way that we function as humans in terms of the way it responds and so forth, means that you can now practice conversations. You can now, prompt it to behave like a human so that you can sort of have a conversation with that, with the LLM and simulate. And so a lot of things that when I'm talking about leadership and AI, is you can use it to assess how you're thinking. You can use it to interview you. You can use it to simulate a conversation. There's so many different ways you can use it like a human. So to get to your question about coaching, is very cool that we now have this tool that not only can behave like a coach, but can also essentially behave like your boss, right? And you can basically say, let's simulate this. Now, to your question it's an interesting question about whether it's going to take over the coaching industry or whatever. I will admit that I use, I don't know why I tend to use ChatGPT, but that's my sort of LLM of choice. And I use it all the time as a coach. In fact, I've uploaded my whole book into a GPT and we'll ask it questions, and see how it would coach something or whatever. So it's definitely a nice tool that people can use to kind of coach themselves. And I think, to your question, is it going to take over coaching? I don't know. I think people crave some kind of human connection. Mm-hmm. And also it's great for sort of coaching kind of, I don't know, I'll call it surface scenarios, but when you have like a broad set of, challenges that kind of go across, multiple kind of issues and whatever, I would say it kind of isn't, it stops being quite as good, right? It can't, it's not, it has this, we talked about this idea of the context window. It has a context, but it's not unlimited. Right. Whereas, we sort of as human coaches and whatever can sort of see patterns across, 20 sessions or whatever it is. And
there's a time piece that I think
right.
that doesn't matter which LLM you're using, can't quite understand. Right. Like I do think that it does refer often to things obviously it's learning about you and continue to learn about you. But in terms of like very specifically like a niche, it'd be interesting to see if that can happen. Is can you create meeting rooms? Right. So gather all the conversations that we've ever had about my workplace and put them in a workplace meeting room, right? And absolutely. Now I get into that meeting room and you are to pull off of all of the things I've said before. And now let me tell you this new problem.
Yeah. Well,
and that's kind of what you developed, right? I mean, that is kind of Boss GPT. So yeah. Like, tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, so you can do something. There's a couple of interesting things. I mean, obviously within, the big, sort of the big LLMs, you can create, in ChatGPT, you can create a project where you basically feed it documents, past conversations. You can, like I said, I uploaded my book. You can
That's
give it.
True. I guess I was thinking about that more for work-based stuff, but now we're talking about more the humanistic thing. I guess you could start a project, which was workplace drama.
Yeah. So you basically say like, here's a project for like, dealing with, I actually have somebody I was talking with last summer who, actually to your point about coaching, she was thinking about coaching. And then I mentioned this idea of creating a twin, and she was having trouble with a coworker. And so she creates this little mini twin of this, of this coworker. And basically was like, it was so good. It helped me figure out what to say to this person, whatever. And so if you have this little sort of project of like, this is this person that I have to deal with, like, I mean, you could absolutely do it that way.
So I want to pause on this because I think this is a good, because I hadn't I don't think I've talked a lot about project folders on the show at all, and I think it's a
Yeah.
good point to talk about this. So in ChatGPT, when you pay to play, essentially, if you're in free ChatGPT, you can't do it. But
Can't
if you
do that.
pay for the monthly subscription, which is often not that expensive, and I don't know if this is true, and I really use ChatGPT primarily and Claude. Those are my two kind of favorite go-tos. But
Yeah.
so, and then once you start working with one, it's like you kind of want to stick with it because, again, the history, the understanding of who you are. But you can actually go in and you can set up projects, and those projects can be for anything. And essentially, when you go to work on that thing again, you open up that project, and it is able to pull off of all the
Right.
information you've shared with it previously. If you just use the main chat, it won't be able to do that. And it will say, I don't remember, you're mentioning this person,
Right.
but I don't remember that person. I don't know anything about that history. I don't save that stuff. It
Yeah.
does when you put it into a project folder. So that's the benefit of doing projects.
Yes.
And so what you're saying and what we're now talking about is, and I hadn't thought about this, which again, it's just like we're continuing our brain. There's so much. It's like hard to
much we
wrap
can
your brain
do.
around it. But we could actually set up projects that are based on people or problems or whatever it is. And so, okay, so she actually set up a project as her coworker that she was struggling with and
Yeah.
fed it all this information. And then basically what you're saying is would come back after having a conversation, reload that in and kind of
Right.
get next steps. Is that how she did it?
Yeah, I mean, I think I don't know exactly whether she was doing it that way, but what I imagine she was doing was she created this project, and like you said, like I mean, the great thing, my favorite example for a project, this is a very simple example, is like if you have to write a lot of proposals, you essentially upload examples of proposals that you've written into a project, and then you have your proposal writing project. And then every time you want to write a proposal, you just go in and you basically say, here's the bullet point details that are different about this proposal, but use my typical proposal template, and it will spit out a proposal based on the template that you've uploaded in there. You can, you could also do that by just uploading a proposal document every time and doing that. But if you have a project, you don't have to do that. And it will get better and better over time at doing that. There's no reason why you couldn't do that with sort of this idea of, that kind of a twin idea that I was talking about of, I actually have like a project that's essentially a person. I have no idea, by the way, whether, HR people are like totally cringing when I say that, but you absolutely can do that.
Well, it's your own personal space. I mean, it's
Yeah.
like also it's, I mean,
Yeah.
I think I'm sure HR people are cringing on having folders for people within your ChatGPT.
My
but-
boss is a total whatever.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it's not something you'd want to be running on your work computer, for sure. Keep that in mind, people, please.
Yes, yeah.
Because that could get you into trouble no matter what. But I do think that I do think that it's your own personal space. It's like a journal. It's just
Yeah.
an online journal. I mean, again, though, it does get to this place where you think about like, and I don't think about this actually, and I know people who are concerned about privacy do think about it. I just don't think about it. I guess I never really care what people know about me. And maybe that's just like not, I don't know. I just I don't really care that someone is learning something about me specifically. Like there's nothing I would ever put in there that I would, I'm not running an illegal operation. I'm not doing anything, right? I mean, the run-of-the-mill problems that I have are problems that most people have. And if somebody found out I had a problem, I wouldn't care.
Right.
Do you think about privacy with regard to what you put in there? Like how do you think about that?
It's a funny question. I mean, I'll think back to, I wrote my book, I published it in June of 24, so almost 2 years ago. And it was right around the time that people were just starting to like use, ChatGPT and some of the other LLMs. And I was like, yeah, I'm just going to upload it up here and see what happens and see how, what does it know about my book and whatever. And, I mean, I like to write, so I don't write articles, with ChatGPT. I write them by hand still, but it was interesting because one day I was it was my brother was sort of playing around with. I think he was the first one to upload my book into ChatGPT, and he's like, test this out, see how it does. And so I tested it out, and I go. and I asked it to write the article that I was writing, and I was kind of struggling with the article that I was writing at the time, and it wrote it, and I'm like, this is actually better than what I was working on. And
Well, because you had fed it your
right, my
writing
whole
style.
book, right? So it
Yeah.
has my writing style, it has my tone and whatever. So I ended up rewriting my article. Not I didn't use what it wrote, but I rewrote it using its structure and whatever. So I guess my answer to your question is I've never worried about it. There was somebody I was working with at the time who had also written a book. It was like, I don't want to put my book in there. Everybody's going to have access to the information. And I'm sitting there like, to me, I'm like, great. The more people who have access to like Jeff Siegel's information, the more people are going to be like, oh, I want to talk to Jeff Siegel, right?
Yeah,
Not
right.
like, and the other thing is, the other thing I guess I feel about privacy, it's a little bit like, it's like I mean, I wouldn't put my social security number in there, but,
Right.
but it's a little bit of like a drop of information in an ocean. Like if you ask ChatGPT for how do I deal with my micromanaging boss, it may pull off of articles I've posted or my book or something because I've uploaded it or whatever it is. It might do it, but you'll never know exactly what it is. And so, I guess, the way I think about it is, it's funny if you go back and I was sort of go back to like various times in human history, right? Like it used to be that being intellectual in a long time ago was the ability to basically memorize and repeat word for word something that somebody else wrote or said, right?
Right. Right.
And then intellectual was the ability to literally write
Right.
out the same thing that somebody else had put into a previous book, right?
Right.
And it's only been in this, kind of the last, I don't know, whatever, couple hundred years where we've become sort of obsessed with this idea of plagiarism, people stealing ideas and whatever. And I get it. I don't want to take away from people's ability to create and own their content. But on the other hand, it's like this idea that, the ideas that people come up with are totally new to the world, nobody's ever thought of, has always been ridiculous. I
Right.
mean, even like you can go back to Shakespeare. I mean, Shakespeare draws off of all kinds of old stories and, and historical things and biblical references and
Yeah.
whatever it is. And yet he put it together in this really unique and new way. And so that's kind of my take on this is I think that what's going to happen is our view of what is acceptable and how you use information that already exists and whatever is just going to adapt to the tool, just like it did,
Yeah.
when the printing press came out and whatever it is. It just hasn't been enough time for us to adapt. I do think it's fascinating. I'm sure you've come across this argument. Is I was teaching marketing at UMass Boston last year. And in the first semester I taught, it was like the students are using AI to cheat. And the second semester I taught, the attitude was, oh my God, we need to train our students how to use AI because this is a tool that they're going to need in the workplace. Like there's this evolving
Yes.
view of what is the role of AI, how do we use it, what's acceptable, and so forth. So
I think we initially were like, "Whoa, hold on, you're cheating, you're working around, right?"
yes,
And I think it became very clear, especially within higher education, that there's no going back. And
right,
so, how do we embrace it and still teach people how to think? How do we teach people how to think? I've
right,
actually become, as this is sort of unrelated topic, but I've become very committed to a liberal arts education
yeah,
because of this piece about. I do think that's a really let's learn a lot of different things,
right,
let's get a lot of different perspectives. Let's not say we're going to focus just on one thing and hopefully learn how to problem solve in a variety of different ways. And that problem solving skill, the ability to communicate those ideas, I think that can be like the defining factor, like, because the technology is just going to be there. Everyone's going to be using it. It
right,
allows someone who doesn't go to college, who doesn't need a higher education, doesn't want one, it's a real equalizer, I think, in terms of opportunity.
right,
So what is the college education going to be? Like what value
right,
does it then have? And I think it has this ability to teach people how to think, and
absolutely,
how to higher level use these tools, and think forward about what they'll be like. What will the world be like in 5 years, and how do we constrain that, be part of it, own it, develop it, right? Like, how is that going to be? It's really, my kids one is in college and one is in high school. So I do think about like, what does the economic world look like for them? What do the career opportunities look like for them? Beyond just scammering to say, well, I'm going to be a nurse because everybody needs to be a nurse. I think there's like a mentality of like, oh, I better become a plumber. And we are going to need those things. I mean, absolutely. They're going to be of a high value, but there'll be a lot of opportunity, And so it's like, where is it going to go? It's kind of like just super exciting,
It is. I have this thing that I have this slide that I sometimes put in presentations, and it shows a picture of like fire, a wheel, and AI, right? And basically, I always say when I pop that slide up on the screen, I say, when in human history has a new technology ever led to fewer jobs? And then I said, let's go back to fire. Before there was fire, there were no cooks. Before there was the wheel, there were no Uber drivers, and so forth, right? So
it's true. You're right.
Right. And so there's two things that I think are happening right now. One is we're in the middle of it. We're in the middle of this change, and it's hard to imagine what happens. But I kind of look back on I'm a marketer. In the last 25 years, 26 years or whatever it is that I've been in marketing, because I got out of business school right around 2000, 2001. Marketing has completely changed. There are so many jobs that didn't exist. There were no SEO marketers, and maybe we were talking about that before. Maybe there won't be in the future.
Yeah.
But there were no SEO marketers. There was no such thing as TikTok. All this content marketing stuff only happened because we all started, walking around with a video camera in our pocket, right?
I mean, influencer 10 years ago, like.
Right. But because the idea, it used to be, I'm sure you remember. When I was a kid, you had to go get your film developed, right? And then if you wanted to video, you had to you had a big clunky video camera. And now you can literally video anything, and you video yourself talking, whatever. The technology has allowed there to be different kinds of marketing. And I think the reality is the same thing's going to happen with AI. So we're sitting here going, AI is disrupting all these jobs that exist today, but we can't see the future state where AI has created new jobs because we have this new tool. I will say, I think the thing that's different, that's really, I think, and I suspect we as a civilization have not really thought through at the level we really need to think through, is the speed at which disruption is happening is so much faster than anything we've ever seen before. And so what's going to happen is you are going to have time frames where people are displaced. And I do work, some of the work I do is with job seekers, and there's definitely a lot of job seekers out there. And every day I feel like I see those green, out, looking for work thing even more and more. Actually, by the way, great usage for AI is, from a job seeker perspective, is I always tell people you need to practice interviewing, but not by memorizing your background, but by practicing curveball questions. So one of my favorite things is have ChatGPT ask you, one curveball question a day. Yeah. Use the voice interface. Actually talk to it, have it talk back to you, and practice the interview, and then ask it to assess your answer and get better and better. It's a great tool for that.
Especially you upload your resume, you upload the job that you've applied for, and you basically can upload the LinkedIn profile of the person you're going to interview with, and all of a sudden it's like, using this person's background, what do you think they're going to be asking me based on the information I've shared with you? And you can absolutely have a full-blown mock interview, again, which just is a tool that, again, I don't think people are really using, but are very helpful. So we need to wrap up a little bit because we're getting towards time. This has been an amazing 30 minutes. I loved talking to you. Tell me a little bit about where people can find you, like if they want to learn about Boss GPT more, so tell me more about that.
Yeah. So, I guess what I'll do is I'll send people to my own, my leadership website, which is simply, Jeff Sigel, JEFFSIGEL.com. And, you can find it there, all articles about everything from Boss GPT, leadership, coaching, training, and all that kind of work, that I do with folks to help them sort of expand their leadership capacity.
Amazing. Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It was such a great 30 minutes, and I I loved learning about, I think, again, this is just a new perspective that people can hear on how they can utilize, these LLMs in a really profound different ways. So thank you so much for talking to us.
Awesome. Thanks so much for having me.